Brisbane City Council is committed to keeping Brisbane clean, green and sustainable by recycling food scraps back into the garden to reduce the amount of organic waste ending up in landfill. In this video, we're going to look at 3 easy options for recycling the food waste at your early learning centre: worm farms, worm tubes and fermentation systems. Worm farming is an easy way to recycle fruit and vegetable scraps, and children will love helping to feed the worms. Worm farms are available from large gardening and hardware stores. It is also possible to make your own, but commercial worm farms are easy to set up and easy to maintain. Your worm farm should be set up in a cool, shady area. Most commercial worm farms will come with a couple of top trays and a drainage tray at the bottom to collect the liquid. To get started, you'll need newspaper, bedding material and compost worms. Firstly, line the tray with a few sheets of damp newspaper or cardboard. Then add in your bedding material. New worm farms generally come with a block of coconut fibre, which needs to be soaked in water until it looks like sawdust. This bedding material is then placed on top of the newspaper. Other bedding materials that can be used include shredded paper or mulch. Remember to soak these materials in water before adding to the top tray on top of the newspaper. Now that you've got your bedding material sorted, it's time to add the worms. Compost worms are special worms that breed rapidly, love a moist, dark environment and eat copious amounts of food. These worms can be bought online or from large hardware stores or from an existing worm farm. You need around 2,000 worms to get started. Place all the worms in a tray and cover with a piece of damp sacking, cardboard or newspaper to keep the worm farm moist and dark, just the way the worms like it. Looking after your worm farm is easy. Your worms eat and sleep in the same area, so put food straight into the tray under the top cover. Feed your worms every 1 or 2 days. Worms like all fruit and vegetable scraps with the exception of citrus fruit, onions, chilli and garlic. Children will enjoy helping to collect scraps and feeding these to the worms. The smaller the food scraps you give them, the more quickly they'll eat them. If the worm farm becomes smelly, you either have too much food or not enough worms. Check that there are plenty of worms in the farm and add more if required. If there's too much food, you can remove some. Aerate the worm farm by stirring and adding a small amount of garden lime. If you produce a lot of food waste, you can always start a second worm farm. As the food is broken down, a liquid called worm tea is produced. This needs to be drained off on a regular basis. The other material that is produced is a soil-like material known as worm castings. Once the top tray is full of castings, it's time to place an empty tray on top. Line the top tray with a wet newspaper in the same way that you did originally and place sacking or a similar cover over the top to keep it moist and cool. Place food in the top tray under the cover and worms will naturally start to move up to this tray once they become hungry. After a couple of months, most of the worms will have moved to the top tray and castings may be removed from the original tray. Castings can be mixed with garden soil to be used as potting mix or used as a top dressing on your lawn. Worm juice should be diluted until it resembles weak tea and then can be used in the same way you'd use any liquid fertiliser. Another way of recycling food scraps is to use a worm tube. Worm tubes are a simple and easy way to add nutrients to raised garden beds. You can buy commercial tubes or make your own out of PVC pipe or buckets. These are best for areas with raised garden beds or for small amounts of food waste. Bury worm tubes in garden beds and add fruit and vegetable scraps. You can wait for worms to find these or speed up the process by adding a handful of compost worms. These tubes are a quick and easy way of adding nutrients to your garden beds. Fermentation or bokashi buckets are another option for recycling organic scraps at your centre. This is an anaerobic system and requires 2 bokashi buckets which can be placed indoors, for example under your kitchen sink. All food waste, including meat, pasta, bread and yogurt, is added to one of the fermentation buckets and a handful of bokashi is sprinkled over the top. Once the bucket is full, leave it for a week or 2 for the waste to ferment and start using the second bucket. After this time, bury fermented waste in the ground or place it in a compost bin. Waste will break down very quickly because of being fermented. Liquid from the bokashi bucket needs to be regularly drained off and can be diluted down and used as a fertiliser. Visit brisbane.qld.gov.au for information about Council's free compost and worm farming workshops.